Welcome to Curiosity Killed the Coach, a podcast for coaches and leaders that want to grow their coaching skills. Today, we're going to talk about
how to define a path forward,
why giving advice can hinder true growth,
benefits of guided self-discovery.
and of course, some practical tools that can help you define a path forward.
Does this sound interesting to you? Keep listening.
Yes. Eric and I go, I want to say way back, and I'm trying to calculate in my mind how way back it is. But we've been having awesome conversations for years, and we said other people can benefit from these conversations. So let's try and record a podcast, and that's what we're doing now.
Exactly. Me and Michel have talked about a podcast for years as well.
Yeah.
And I think now is just the time. This is the right time. Let's just term it that way. Now is the right time to do it. I'm very much looking forward to this journey that we're embarking on together.
Yes. Cool.
The topic that we have is how to define a path forward. That was at least the title of this podcast. But Michel, maybe you can provide a bit of a voiceover on how we found this topic.
Basically, as a coach, people come up to me when they have a problem, at least defining what they want to do, what their next step is. The topic, how do you define a way forward, has to do with two things. First off, I recognize this very much. I struggle sometimes to see what's the best next step for my business, for me personally in my life. I don't think that coaches are smarter, wiser, or different than people. We have a role of helping others by standing next to them and looking at their challenge with fresh eyes. At the same time, finding your way forward, sometimes it's complex. Let's say you're an organization. What's our next step? There are a lot of things on the line, a lot of cogs in the machine that are turning. What should we do? Or you're a person, I want to move forward in my career. I want to find a new job. I need a bit more challenge, but not a clue where to start. Now, how then do you define a way forward for yourself? Or as a coach, how do you define a way forward with someone else?
Mm-hmm. In your experience, how do coaches differ from other people that provide you with advice? As a coach, how do you see that coaches differ versus non-coaches in how they approach people that are dealing with the problem of defining a path forward?
I think with friends, with family, you're very close to each other and you're very connected. So usually you know the context that the other person is in, which is nice because then less explaining that you need to do. At the same time, a coach that is totally separated from your life looks at a problem with fresh eyes. And I don't think it's so much advice as it is standing next to the person and helping them untangle the web of thoughts or the tangled weeds of what they need to do. Because life, organizations, things are complex.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not in the mix, then you can look at a problem differently. That's a large advantage. I would say a good coach gives as less advice as possible. Is that a right word in English? Danglish? Did I danglish it up?
You danglished it up. I don't know. Give less advice.
Yeah, so
the least possible, at least now I'm also danglishing it up. Give the least amount of advice as possible.
Maybe a good example is I was given a workshop. There was a part in the workshop where people could have some intervention, some advice. They could bring in a real problem, a real topic they had, and they would formulate it, and people would ask questions, try to dig deeper, try to find out what's the question behind the question, and then give them some advice. And the funny thing is that while we were doing that, the group came with very pragmatic, very practical stuff.
You mean challenges or?
No. So really good advice.
After going through the whole process.
Yeah, going through the whole process, they gave good advice. The funny thing is they were in this group dynamic. I'm here to give advice. I'm here to help this person get a step further. And this person said, things are going great. I'm looking forward to my next step. So this is really in context with the topic now. I'm ready for my next step. But how do I determine what my next step is? And people started asking me, hey, what did you do before? Trying to paint the picture, trying to get the context.
Mm-hmm.
They said, hey, maybe set goals for yourself and maybe repeat what you did before. That worked for you. And though very practical advice that you could really use, what happened was I stood at a bit of a distance and I was looking at it and I thought, ooh, he doesn't really know how he got here. So his problem was, I'm doing great. I made really small steps and I learned and I grew. But looking back now, I don't really know how I did this. And if it's only luck, then I have a problem because I can't train luck and I can't work hard on luck. So I shared my observation with him and that's basically what he said. That's right. I just don't know what made me successful. And looking at what coaches do, I think making sense of the past, making sense of the things you've done, realizing where you are now and maybe problems you're facing now or the situation you're in right now, and then looking forward to the future, what do you want to do? I think that's where we can really help people out.
Cool.
And maybe a nice addition to it is that I think some problems, we have a sense of what it is, but sometimes we hide it in the fog. It's either unclear to us or we're just afraid to make the steps into the future. Then it really helps to talk with somebody who is not talking with you in a way, like you can have conversations with people that you say, like, hey, blah, 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 you're telling something. At the same time, the person is kind of listening, half, but mainly listening to know, okay, what is he going to say that I can reply to? So in turn, focused on him or herself instead of on the other person. And I think a good coach is a practiced listener. So sometimes people do have their own solution ready. They just don't realize it yet because, well, talking with somebody else also structures your thinking. So I think that's really where coaches, or if you're a leader, you have an employee, it really helps to really listen what the person says. And then to ask clarifying questions to be able to move forward.
Yeah, if I understand you correctly, the things that you've mentioned to answer the question of what is the added value of a coach over talking to someone who is a family member or just any other person, is that a coach is more skilled in the act of active listening. Coaches is unbiased, is not as close to the person and doesn't have that much background information that can influence him or her in that conversation. And thirdly, the coach has a level of expertise, so understands that it is not necessarily about giving that person advice, but guiding that person in their process of self-discovery, understanding the challenge that they're facing, maybe also the causes of the challenge. And then through that process of self-reflection, coming to actions, or let's call them next steps themselves.
I think that's a great thing. When somebody discovers something for themselves, then you don't need to convince them to do it. It's their own discovery. And I think that's a great thing of coaching. And also when you mentioned expertise, what I was thinking, of course, it's skills that you develop and you can train and you can learn over time. But I think it's also mainly that you have distance from the person. And I would say a humble attitude, because you can probably ask anybody advice, but a lot of persons will answer from their own context. Others will just give random advice or really general advice. Basically, for me, I also go to a coach because I think if you're a coach, you should get coaching as well. That's always what I advise. It's a way to have the most honest conversations, because for a coach, I think it's better and it's more valuable to have a real conversation with you than to play nice or than to just walk around the dark turds in your life.
Yeah. That brings me to the following question, because it almost feels as humans, our tendency is to give advice, right? So someone approaches us with a challenge, and the first tendency that you have is, I can relate this to something else I personally have faced in the past, or I've seen someone else face in the past. I know what to tell this person. I'm going to give advice. How do you as a coach deal with this temptation that you probably also have?
By becoming less of an idiot over time. That's basically it. Because when I started coaching, sometimes the answer is staring you in the face. At least you think it is. Through experience, I found out that people are way more complex than you think. If you're, for instance, coaching organizations or teams, then you have that complexity times however many people you have. And it's actually weird to think that you have the solution. I would say when starting coaching, I was humbled, and I had some benefit of some people giving really honest feedback as well. If you're willing to learn, I think you can learn from anyone. And giving advice is something that might be useful in an emergency scenario. The building's on fire, we need to exit. Shall we go left or right? How fast do you think we should walk? Where do you want to go? Want to go left or right? And basically then you say left, out the door, let's save our lives. But that's only short term. I think long term, maybe better said, if a person isn't in a dire situation, then it's always better to have people make their own decisions. Because the next time the house is on fire, maybe a bad analogy because I talked about that as an urgent scenario. But let's say the house is on fire and you're not there. You want people to make their own decisions. So I think in a house fire situation, you lead by example and maybe you coach by example in a way. But it's also a trap, I think, because as soon as you feel that you're needed and essential in that situation, then you have the hero complex. Let me tell you what to do. And I think that's arrogant. Sometimes we're just stupid and we think, oh, this is the quicker route. Let me give you some advice. Then we get super frustrated that people don't actually do it. And yeah, okay, that's basically because it's my advice in your life. How about your advice in your life?
In your life.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. I think we all, and again, this is not, I think, not Michel and not us bashing other people that do at this moment, or coaches maybe even that give others advice. I think you try to do that because you want to add value, right? You want to add value as not only a coach, but also as another person. You want to help that person and deal with their challenge and make a step forward. Yeah. I think what you're saying and also the belief that I share is the best way to help someone forward is not by giving advice, but by helping them understand the challenge that they're facing, reflect on it, and come up with a solution themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I have a nice example of this because I had a conversation with somebody. He was a manager. He wanted to move into another management position at other companies. He was looking, he was shopping, and he was saying, I don't know if I'm a good fit for these companies. I don't know if I've done what they want me to do there. And so he asked my advice. He shared some, some applications and stuff like that. And when I read them, I was like, but these are so well suited for you. This is exactly what you did. Not only that, I think you can add even more value here. It's a better fit, probably. And I could have said that, of course. I said, don't worry, just do it. You should just go, apply. You're a great fit. But the question that arose with me is, when it's so obvious to me that it's a good fit, why don't they see it's a good fit? Because I'm not the one in the interview. I'm not the one applying for the job. I'm not the one that's going to have to, let's say it's not one interview. Sometimes it's 5. I'm not going to be there in the room screaming in their ear, it's a good fit, it's a good fit. Then I work with him to find out, what did you do in the past? And what of the things that you did are elements that you can use or reuse again in this new scenario, in this new job. And while working on it, I did this, but this was, vrijwilligerswerk.
Or voluntary work.
Yeah, thanks. This was just,
charity.
Yeah, this was just charity work. I said, okay, but didn't you do the work then? Yeah, I did the work, but it was for a charity. Yeah, it was for a charity. Okay, but the skills that you used for the charity, can you reapply them here in this situation? Yes. Okay. Yeah, so I think I do have this experience. Yeah, I think you do as well. Let's look at the next part. Because sometimes it's just, are we allowing ourselves to be honest about what we can truly do? And I think a lot of times it's insecurity that stops us. And I think it's insecurity as a coach to advise people. So for me, the most freeing thing was to let go of the insecurity of, if I don't tell them what to do, they might think that I do not know what to do. And the most freeing part was, most of the situations, I really don't know what to do. I have some good guesses. I have experience, of course. I've spoken to a lot of people, but for their specific situation in their life, in this circumstance, with this partner and with this job and with this, all the things that are going on, how likely is it that I have the perfect advice for that person?
Yeah.
I would say it's unlikely. And yeah, it always struck me as, do I want them to succeed or do I want to succeed? And my role as a coach is to stand next to a person and to help them succeed. Same with an organization. Do I want the leader of that organization to succeed? Or do I want to prove how good of a coach I am to help them succeed? I think it's better because when people hire me, it's for a specific time. When that's done, I'm gone. I would like to see the good work continue.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is, when you help them, when your goal is to primarily help them succeed, mostly the second one also follows. So you also succeed.
Exactly.
In your role as a coach.
Yeah, true. And I think the other way around, I think you also, in a way, fail. And I think it's dangerous in a way, like you give people advice over a very complex situation. Yeah, if it succeeds, great. Your advice was wonderful. You have a victory. If it fails, it's up to them. If I give you advice, Eric, if you want to do this marathon, instead of running marathons, you should sprint every day for an hour. It will give your muscles the best training for a long run of a marathon, which is bullshit, probably, because what do I know? I hope it's bullshit, actually. I can't imagine that working. But if you don't get to the end of the marathon, what's it to me? That I failed in my advice? You're actually burning out your muscles there on the street and crawling to the finish line and not making it. And that's what I dislike if we just randomly advise people stuff like we know. I don't think we should act like a guru that knows everything. I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. The advice trap.
The advice trap, yeah, that's nice.
Aside from the advice trap, what are other traps that you see coaches fall into?
In helping people to find a path forward?
And helping people to find a path forward.
So I use my own experience. Of course, I read a lot, I learn a lot. So I try to combine everything, the practical stuff with the theoretical stuff. But if you create like a separate coach entity of yourself, totally separate from your life, I think you lack the empathy to actually help somebody. So maybe that's a trap. Like letting coaching be a gimmick. If I do this, then this will happen.
Yeah.
I don't think that works. I think it's way too complex. It's like trying to fix your own car. If I turn on this and I screw on that, you better know what you're doing because you're probably ruining the car. Right?
So you're essentially saying mostly the problems that you solve with coaching are complex problems. So there is no preset steps that you as a coach can take or the receiver of coaching can take. It's usually a process of, how do you turn that? I see it in front of me right now. Of course, the listener cannot see what we have drawn, but this circle, it's not a circle, it's a
Circle. Yeah, like figuring out how to do this.
figuring out. It's
Circling towards the center.
Exactly. You're circling towards the center. You're not step one and then from step one going to step two. It's not a ladder that you're climbing, but it's a maze that you're in, first trying to understand what the real challenge is that you're facing as coachee. You're navigating that together with your coach. And when you've navigated that, I think maybe then you can start thinking about a solution. But oftentimes, when you think you figured out what the challenge is and you're in the solutioning phase, you realize that might not even be the real problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
So you circle back. It's this dance that you almost perform together with your, I don't want to say perform, but engage in with your coach.
True. And I think there's an interaction going on in coaching as well. And I know there are boundaries and I know it's good to have good boundaries, of course, but there is an interaction. It's like, it's not a human talking to a robot. It's a human talking to another human.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that usually those problems are complex because the moment that people seek help, they have become complex or complicated. I don't know if complex and complicated are like have two different meanings in English as well as in Dutch, like complex and gecompliceerd. I think one is all the wires are crossed and you need to untangle it, thanks. And the other one is just compounding problems stacking on top of each other. You're looking it up?
I'm looking it up from a perspective of there is a difference between a complex problem and a complicated problem.
Yeah.
And this is borrowing it a bit from agility. And they say I forgot what the guy's name is. But to solve a complicated problem, you can have a planning phase where you just figure out, okay, this is the problem. These are the steps we need to take. And if we take these steps, problem will be solved.
Exactly.
But for complex problems, there's iterations that you need to take.
Yeah.
And sometimes you test things out, you test out an hypothesis, that hypothesis fails, you go back to the drawing board, you start basically all over again. I think you can easily bring that back also to coaching.
Yeah.
Because usually I think problems are complex because the solution is not that straightforward. Or the process of arriving at the solution is not straightforward. To get back to the maze analogy, you're in a maze and you think you found the exit, but then something else pops up and you circle back to, at the end of the day, hopefully, if it ends successfully for you, you find the solution. You find out what the problem is you're trying to solve and you find the solution.
Yeah, and I think so people's lives are a 3D maze, right? So it's not only 2 dimensions, it's a complex mess, complicated, all at the same time.
Yeah.
So as a coach, you try to, I think first off, you try to find the place that the person is willing to look at to try to improve. But at the same time, it needs to be deep enough. You need to touch on something real, because otherwise you're only touching the superficial things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say somebody comes and says, hey, I don't feel well. My health isn't that great. I want to exercise more. Can you help me how to get that going? All right. You could do it, especially if you're a personal trainer. Let's look at your workout schedule, how your nutrition and stuff like that. But yeah, what I like to do when I talk to people is find out, okay, so you want to be more healthy, makes sense, right? What do you want to achieve when you have your health? What's this in service of? Mm-hmm. What's the larger goal you're going towards? That's a difficult question because people often don't know. But at the same time, you're going to have to try to ask some questions that people can't answer to be able to find what's driving them or what's the core of their problem. Because a lot of times we come with like a side effect of a problem. And the question is, do we want to address a real problem that's going on?
Yeah. If I understand correctly what you're saying, do you want to tackle the root of the problem or do you want to tackle a symptom?
Yeah, I think sometimes people only want to work on a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe it's good to have honest conversations and question what they really want. Because with limited thinking, you're happy that you have the symptom. at least you have something to work on. But with a bit more work, you can find out where it stems from. If I look at myself with, for instance, public speaking, why do I feel a barrier when I talk in front of a large group? Why don't I feel that barrier when I talk in front of a smaller group? I could say, okay, it's the group size that's the problem. Never talk in front of large audiences. And it's all dark and spotlights and stuff anyways, you know, who wants that? But what's the root there? Why is there a difference between 15 or 30 people and 100? Might be interesting for me to look into it. When will I look into it? At the moment it starts blocking me from the things I want to achieve. And then it makes sense for me to look into it and to search and to find, okay, what's at the core of this problem? Why is this a barrier for me? And maybe the core of the problem isn't the speaking at all. Do I allow myself to speak in front of a large group? Or do I feel like I need to deserve to do that? Maybe it could be something entirely different. But the symptom then would be, and that's probably also a problem statement, I don't like talking in front of large audiences, or I don't like speaking in public, which is a very general term. And that's probably the start of that search for the core of the problem that you actually want to address.
Yeah, interesting.
If we're talking about how to define a path forward, I would say for yourself and for a client are two different things. But I think if you're as a coach finding a path forward for yourself, then it's easier also to help somebody else do it. Because if you're not willing to face the fear of moving forward, how are you willing and able to help somebody else do it?
Do you think that's mutually...
I think it's partially. But when I said it, I was thinking like, oh, but Michel, you're never done learning. You're never done with growing. So can I only start to help somebody out when I'm perfect? I would say no, because then you can never help anybody else out.
Yeah.
But the willingness is different than succeeding, I think. The willingness to face your problems, the willingness, for instance, as a coach to be coached. I think that shows something about you as a coach, that you're willing also to dive deeper into yourself and to find out what's going on. When I look at myself, it's for the purpose of developing myself and for the purpose of being able to help others as well. But that's as well. It's also for me. Yeah, I think coaches are just humans, just people. We always like to have, I say we always, this is the first episode, but I would say in our lives and also, of course, in our podcast, we want to give people some practical tips. How do you actually do this? And I would say if you want to grow as a person or you want to define a path forward, and let's say you don't have a coach, let's say you just don't know how to start moving, I would say find another idiot. You just find somebody. Find your friend, someone you trust, your spouse, a colleague, maybe an expert on a certain topic that you're interested in, or maybe an expert on the problem you're facing. Dare to be vulnerable enough to ask questions and to speak like, hey, I'm running into this. Of course, it's great if you can find a coach. It's great if you can have a conversation there. Goals. It is an expertise, but I think usually the most handy step for most people is just to find somebody else to talk to. In my mind, I go back to my media training in the past. You had German terms, so I don't know if it translates as well, if it's being used in other places in the world, but they call it Sprachhund. What's that? Speaking dog, or maybe dog speech? I don't know. Please, German people, don't kill me.
And there go our German machines.
Yeah, indeed. But the Sprachhund, basically they use it, at least when I was trained with the Dutch television, in a scenario when you want somebody to deliver some lines of dialogue and there's nobody else, you can add a dog in the room. And that solo person with a dog, or with Tom Hanks with the volleyball, has somebody to talk to instead of only acting out and people have to guess. The person can actually talk to the dog and say what their problem is, drives them, motivates them. I would say for people that want to move forward and want to define a path forward, sometimes you need to just hear yourself speak out loud.
Yeah.
Need to hear the words that you're saying. And sometimes you're like, oh crap, that's a really stupid thing I'm saying here. Or, hey, maybe if I'm saying this, maybe this means to me that I should go and do this. That's a minimal step.
Yeah.
So talk to your dog, talk to the closest idiot you can find.
Don't call him an idiot though.
And I would say find somebody you trust. That's usually the best. And if you have really complex stuff, find somebody that tangled with stuff like that before, so that you can actually get maybe some educated guessing.
Yeah.
Some educated coaching.
Yeah, interesting. It also popped in my mind. It's a cost-effective way to learn as well. You can always invest in a coach or invest in an expert who can train you.
That's what we did, right? Our conversations, we took it to a podcast because we loved our conversations and we thought it would be valuable for others. We just talked to each other and shared openly, and we had great conversations and learned a lot lot from it by being vulnerable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I just have to make the joke. We are each other's idiot. I can second what you're saying. I think it's also, a beautiful way of tackling a challenge together as well and learning together.
I think for a coach, it's like the airplane mode, right? So the airplane pressure is off, the mask falls from the compartment, and you need to put on your own mask first and then help out a person next to you, let's say a child or a stranger that's fallen asleep and is not waking up at that moment. And I think as a coach, it's good to also put your, not energy mask, oxygen mask on. So taking care of yourself as a coach, making sure that you not only dole out advice, but also get coaching and reflect on yourself and how you're doing things and learn. I think that's a great way as a coach to stay sharp and to stay open as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned a couple of practical tips. What are other practical tools that you use, not just to help yourself forward, but also help others find a path forward?
For me, I did future authoring. That's a writing tool that helps you in steps write down a plan for your own life. Really define what you want to do, really define what that means. And based on that, I could say, okay, career-wise, I need to make this decision. That's not so hard anymore because I generally know the direction that I'm traveling. So we'll put it in the show notes. I think future authoring is a really nice tool, and you can do it how elaborate or maybe short as you want, but I think it's a really handy tool. So that's for yourself. What I do with people, especially for instance on the career advice part, I try to map out, like I see a chart in front of me. You're trying to map out where you are at this moment, where you've been and where you're going. I think we don't take a lot of time to make really conscious for ourselves where we are on that map. In the beginning of the podcast, we mentioned something about keeping things in a fog, keeping things either hidden or unclear for yourself. I think what I do a lot with people is looking, where are you on this map? That helps you with saying the problem that you're now facing, is it a past problem, now problem, or future problem? Is it something I've done in the past that caused me to be here? Mm-hmm. Is the now so complex, complicated, under pressure? Are things happening now that's messing me up? Or do I just don't know where to go in my future? Do I just don't have a clue what I actually want to do? A lot of the times, that's what you can use to filter out, like, where's the issue? Okay, I need to map out where I am. I need to map out how I got here. And then I can map out where I need to go. Mm-hmm. That's in one-on-one coaching, but you can do this also for organizations. It's a bit more complex. You have a lot more moving pieces, but that's basically what you can do. Mm-hmm. A strategy for a department. Let's map out where we are right now. Where do we want to go? Because a lot of times companies do have goals. Like, we want to have this. Sometimes they're vague goals. Sometimes they're really well-defined goals. But the strategy, how to get there, mapping that out, I think that's a lot of the questions I get is, okay, I know what I want, but actually, how do I get here? Yeah. How do I help my people get there as well? And how do I not completely destroy my company or our company culture? Or how do I make sure we're not going to lose everybody along the way when we're making this transition? Cool. How do you do it? What do you do with people or maybe for yourself as well?
I think one tool that I recently used with a product owner to get that, similar to what you mentioned, to get that overview, similar to what you mentioned about the, let's call it the journey map or roadmap, is EcoCycle planning. It's a liberating structure, something you will hear probably a bit more often in this podcast, because I know that you are also a big fan of it and I'm a big fan of it. For that product owner, there was a big gap between the activities she wants to spend time on versus the activities she's actually doing. So this is also a tool to provide insight into the activities that you are currently spending your time on, the value that it provides, and also the activities that are stuck, that you want to spend more time on, but you're actually not. Yeah. So that's a big one for me.
I like EcoCycle because it's also a lot of people, usually afterwards, when you do it with a big group, for instance, it's so funny that like a leader will come up to you and say, oh, it's so awesome that this was all in our heads already.
Exactly.
Instead of you standing there, oh, you should do this with your company. You should go left. You should go right. That's really cool. The combined knowledge of the group can also be smart.
Yeah. Yeah, that provides, I think, the more brains are activated. Obviously, you don't want groups of 100 people. But in general, if you work with a small to medium-sized group or a small group, the more brains that are activated, the better your overview is. But I think it was the first time I did it individually, and I was also surprised by the results. Yeah. I think and the product owner was also very happy with the overview that provided for her.
Yeah, it's cool that you can use a tool like that also in one-on-one coaching.
Also in one-on-one coaching, and just like you mentioned, it's, I think, more common in team and for larger groups. groups. I just term it that way.
Yeah.
So that's one I definitely use.
Yeah, for people listening, we'll share the tools and the things we use in the show notes.
Yes,
Because,
sharing is caring.
yeah, sharing is caring. Exactly.
On that note,
Yeah.
I think we can wrap this podcast up.
Yeah, I think so as well. Any last remarks, Eric?
Maybe it's also good to mention, aside from these practical tools that we share in the show notes, we also share ways to get in contact with us. So if you want to get in contact with Michel or with me, also navigate to the show notes and find links to content and contact information.
Yeah. If you like this episode, please let us know. If you have topics or questions, please reach out. That would be awesome to hear from you. And with that being said, this was Curiosity Killed the Coach. Thanks for listening and catch you next time.
Ciao.